careful about what we put into this system that might cause harm to ourselves or others. And so Thich Nhat Hanh was talking about these precepts, and they sound like rules, right? They sound like more or less rules. Don't steal, don't lie, right? But what Thich Nhat Hanh said was, he said, the precepts are love. The precepts are love. And it's possible to actually rejoice with the precepts. Now, I have to say that's not my association with rules, even though I don't look like a Dharma punk. And even though I follow all the rules plus a lot of other rules, I've never believed in any of them, you know. The kind of groundlessness, the lack of foundation, you know, like the lack of ultimate authority for this rule or that rule, that was like apparent to me, even from like very, very young, you know. But that doesn't mean actually that they don't serve us. So the precepts, they're not, whenever we hear about ethics and conduct, we kind of, they're not meant to be this like airtight ethical system that answers every moral question there is. So in moral philosophy, for example, they do these things where they're like, okay, maybe some of you know this, you're on a trolley, you see up ahead, the brakes fail, you see up ahead, there are 5 people who are stuck on the tracks. You can, turn the trolley and go on another track where you see there's 1 person stuck on the tracks. If you don't touch the steering wheel, you're gonna kill 5 people. If you do, and you divert the trolley to the other track, you're acting in a concerted way, and you know you're gonna kill 1 person. Now tell me, what does your system of moral philosophy tell about this dilemma?
Kill 1 person.
Okay, you say 1. Some people would say yeah, but then other people would say 5. It gets, and they'd be challenged, right? And it's like, what do the precepts say about this? You know? Stop the train, yeah. Right. So, the precepts are not meant to resolve crazy philosophical, intense dilemmas like this. I don't know how much value they provide to solving deep ethical conundrums, yeah? But they're very good guides in general, almost all the time, for most of the moral questions that we face. And they are quite central to progress, actually. I think in my own practice, I became a bit kind of identified with meditative attainments, right? Meaning that at some level I thought like, oh, the path, the deepest path, it's all about various kind of states of mind or meditative attainments, samadhi, insight, various forms of freedom and altered states of awareness, non-ordinary states of consciousness. And I think there's a part of me that felt like, yeah, that's the heart of practice. And kindness, ethical behavior, anybody could do that, right? It's pedestrian, right? Like enlightenment. But over time, I think we can see actually ethics, sila, being much more central to this and having equal place and equally as beautiful to some of the more rarefied states of mind and attainments. So sometimes I've said that kindness is both the means and the end. And I think we might be able to say something like that about sila too. That it is both the means and the end. It's both the kind of path of practice, and also it's the fruit of practice. So it's the means, we could say, because the harm that we do, it complicates everything for us. And the harm we do tends to kind of fracture the mind in a way. And of course, there's usually some remorse and there's some proliferation, thought, not being found out, and it leads to this sense of like division in the heart. And so Gandhi said, one cannot do the right thing in one sphere of life while being occupied doing the wrong in another sphere. Life is one indivisible whole. And so that sense of being fractured or being of two minds, or the kind of ambivalence, the mixed feelings that come when we're doing some harm, that is incompatible with relaxation, peace. It becomes a preoccupation in a way. Because there's a dimension of our being that very deeply wishes not to do harm. And when we're out of step with that, it feels like we're betraying something. It feels like we're abandoning some aspect of our being. Now, this practice of the precepts, though it seems kind of mundane in a way, I think also is a means of our liberation insofar as I've noticed that it can help us see delusion more clearly. When we listen to our sila, when we look and pay attention to it, we actually can learn something about the delusion in the mind. So, the three roots of suffering in Buddhism: greed, hatred, delusion. And as we said, like greed and hatred are very apparent in the mind, right? It's like much easier to recognize greed and hatred, right? But delusion is like the water we swim in. We never think we're deluded, right? It's like, oh, I'm just deluded, right? No, it's like we think we're omniscient. We think we know all, actually. And if we thought we were deluded, we would change, right? So it's like tricky. How do we see delusion? And one of the ways is we pay attention to our sila, and we learn where we learn about our clinging by seeing how we break the precepts. Yeah. Sila, ethical conduct. Ethical, sila is the Pali word for moral conduct. Yeah. So we pay attention to this. We pay attention, for example, if we find ourselves lying, and if we really are paying attention, we're actually going to investigate to see what is going on here. Like, what's the nature of the clinging? What's the nature of the... Why are we trying to... what are we up to? How are we curating the self for others, and why? Yeah. This is actually important data for us. Sam Harris says, when you give yourself the out of lying, you deny yourself the kinds of collisions with reality that are necessary to improve your life. A commitment to honesty is a mirror you hold up to yourself where you can discover who you are in relation to others and in relation to your moment-to-moment experience. So this is just briefly sketching some of the ways that our conduct is the means, but also the fruit. And so sometimes it's said that the precepts are not, it's not commandments of how you should act, it's a description of how an enlightened person does act. Yeah. And this comes out of the notion that all of our the ethical harm that we do arises out of greed, hatred, delusion. And that actually when we digest that, when we start to see more clearly, as we start to diffuse the forces of aversion, of hatred, of greed, our conduct becomes effortlessly more benign, more non-harming, more kind. Actually, the roots of harm aren't there in the same way. And so the teacher I was just on retreat with, one of them, Greg Scharf, was with this, recently died at 99, this Burmese teacher who was just like infectiously happy, just like, just the happiest person he'd ever met. And he spent time with lots of happy Dharma people, And so at some point, they're in Burma, and they asked, why are you so happy? And the teacher, Sayadaw Mei Ting, or something like that, I don't know his name exactly, he was kind of like, even in his late 90s, he was very kind of like, he made bold, gestures. And so they said, why are you so happy? He said, because I have no ill will. I have no ill will against you. No ill will against you. No ill will for anyone in the world. Amidst that mind, right? How could harm arise, right? Yeah. And so this is the sense in which our conduct becomes the fruit of our goodness. It becomes the fruit of being in deep alignment with that aspect of our being that truly wishes no harm. Let's just sit for a moment. So if we're going to bet on something as a species, as an individual, we might consider betting on kindness. Something that we don't regret before we die. May we all be free from suffering. A couple words. Thanks for the streaming action there. Appreciate it, gentlemen. So this center, and actually our lives really built on generosity. And our intention is always to, the Dharma, as I've said, the Dharma is always offered freely. Like the words that I'm speaking, I want nothing for them, And if they're not spoken freely, it's not the Dharma. And so I know that, and that's what leaves me feeling in total integrity when I ask for your money. So if it's, everyone is most welcome. If it's not a hardship to contribute $10 or $15, that's much appreciated and supports the center. I'm just back, so I was just checking out the flyers for different day-longs happening and classes, and so please check that out. Lots of good stuff, and see you soon. Thanks for having me back. Nice to see you. It's nice to be here. So.
And if anybody knows about rewiring lamps and wants a little project for the center, feel free to come and find me.
Yeah.
The best way to kind of just accept that and be with it is so you can let it go.
Yeah.
What's the best way to, or just one way?
One way, yes. So the question around resistance, what's the best way, or if not the best way, one way of dealing with it? Can you say a little bit more what you mean by resistance?
Resistance to, so you're having irritation because there's who knows why, something triggers it.
Yeah.
And then there's irritation, and obviously you're being resistant to whatever's happening.
Yeah.
Saying maybe somebody else triggered it, but it's not them. It's an irritation in you that's like underlying. It's there. It's like an energy field.
Yeah.
Pops up every once in a while.
Yeah.
So like to be with that,
Yeah.
It's one way to kind of conceptualize being with it and accepting it, so that you can start to, detach from it or transmute it out.
Well, I would say that a few things. There's an important attitude that you point to that's really critical in this, namely that our habit is to always basically just to assume that somehow the perfect conditions are like around the corner, and it's just the universe got off its rails slightly, but we're going to get it right back on as soon as that noise stops or whatever, And there's the kind of insight that something is always wrong. That only seeps into the heart really over years, I think. And so in a certain sense, we kind of are abandoning the hope that we're ever going to arrange things perfectly. And there's a sense of responsibility for what arises. It's not to say that there are not triggers externally, right? But it's actually, and it's not to say always oh, that's totally fine. But it's to acknowledge that the seeds of irritation lie within us. And I know anytime I'm annoyed by the person who's driving too slowly in front of me, the Dalai Lama would not be annoyed in the same way, just to know these are the seeds within me. And then just, we say like as meditation teachers, we say like, oh, just open your heart to that, just let go into that, That is epic to do that, Even subtle, not very intense discomforts, to open the heart to it is a very kind of like courageous gesture, full of willingness, even when it's not so intense. And so I think part of it, we have to be humble about like what's being asked actually, and not be surprised when we find ourselves challenged to even open to modest discomforts, right? So then a couple more things. I find it very helpful to distinguish between resistance, or resistance is really just a flavor of unpleasantness, but it's arising both in the mind and the body. And actually being clear on where it's arising in experience. When it's like this amorphous, diffuse thing of like something is wrong, you know that feeling? Like just that kind of like, we can't be with that. We actually have to be with the direct sensory experience, which is body and mind getting tangled together. So I have learned to just trust, to go to the body. For me, it's often in the chest. And there's various flavors of contraction, of change that I'm like bracing against. And that's, for me, like I sort of bathe those particular sensations in awareness and just gently seeding the mind with the thoughts of love, acceptance, and the sense of responsibility to this pain. Like I'm not going to abandon my heart to the kilesas. Meaning I'm not going to abandon my heart to the forces of greed and hatred. And so in this way, we're really like, we're staying with ourselves. Like I'm not gonna abandon myself in this. And this is like the ripening of equanimity, really, which is at the heart of the practice, and evolves more slowly than the present time awareness, I think. But over time, it's like the capacity of the heart. We just can be with even just like a little more. But in the ability to be with a little more, we are a lot more free, actually. We don't have to learn how to be with every heartbreak and every imaginable sorrow of our lives, of this world. We just like gently expand our capacity. And that translates into a lot more freedom, because so much of our life is kind of like fidgeting out of relatively modest discomforts. And when some of that habit starts to melt away, we find that we feel quite a bit freer. Yeah, please.
Hey, I
like my primary thing that I do and get paid to do is to sit in front of a computer and perform some form of mental acrobatics and engage my thoughts. And it's really hard to not just get swept up and gone within like 2 minutes and then to spend the next 8 or 9 hours that way.
Yeah.
I don't really know how to relate to that appropriately and functionally without just getting totally lost.
Yeah. So question around practice and mindfulness with kind of intellectually demanding work and the tendency of finding oneself staying with it for a short period of time, but then really being, absorbed in it for the next 8 or 9 hours. I am not able to bring continuity of mindfulness usually when I'm doing intense intellectual work. What I do try to do is there are other very wholesome mental qualities that actually we can bring. So, for example, concentration. We can be more or less focused within that, and it's even if we're not, conscious, like to do one's taxes or something, and just be like mindful the whole time. I don't know how people do that kind of stuff. But we can be like unifying the mind, and that is wholesome. And then when so we're really giving ourselves to it. It's not a mindfulness practice, it's more of a concentration practice. And when we do notice, when there is a kind of like moment of mindfulness, we don't have to try to keep that going, but we might just simply relax our body. When I'm doing some years ago, on a retreat, I was doing kind of intense physical work as part of my work meditation. Which is common on retreats. For half an hour, you do your yogi job or work meditation. And it was hard to, I did have to focus, and it was kind of like physical. But what I would try to do was like really do the job well, really give myself to it. And then when I would have moments of mindfulness where I was like aware for a moment of what was happening, I would just try to relax my body. Just like whole body, relax. And then go back in. And that might happen many times. But that's one way of working. Yeah, sure. Maybe one more, yeah.
I went away for Thanksgiving, and I had like 5 days out of the city, and I was like very struck by how it was out in nature, and it was like really beautiful. And then I came back, and to my horror, like I realized how easy it is to get swept up in this kind of numb, for myself, this like numb reality of checking things off of lists and going, like constantly being in process. And I think I kind of become aware of the fact that like, and this is a really painful experience, of the fact that like I don't know if I know how to even be present in like joyful situations, And I think for me, like, I've been trying to like take maybe some breaths in them, but it's weird for me to be aware of the fact that like, often my path right now is the awareness of the fact that like, sometimes I'll be looking at an incredible vista, or like going to some incredible thing that like I know I want to, like it's easier to like Facebook about it afterwards, or like try to capture it for later than it is to actually be in it. It's actually profoundly uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I think like that's kind of embarrassing to say, because it's just like shouldn't we all be really good at pleasure,
Yeah.
but it's like, it's weird to be in that space, and there's like a sadness in that, because the only thing I can really do actively is just continue to practice learning how to be with myself in every situation. But like in the present moment, it's kind of like there's a sadness to that, because it makes you want to do everything else. It makes you want to like fix something, because it's like that's not right, you know. And so I'm just wondering that weird kind of
Yeah. So opening to pleasure. A couple thoughts. I definitely know the experience of looking at some beautiful sunset, and I'm like taking it in real deeply, and then I'm like, that's enough. I'm gonna go fiddle. And I think that stuff arises for different reasons. Sometimes what's happening is that to open to pleasure, we're pausing. We're actually pausing, and so the momentum of busyness and doingness, actually, it's like. It's like, I don't know, I have this image of this cartoon. I don't even know if it's a real cartoon, but it's like, some character that's like running, except there's like a rubber band attached to them and like some heavy weight, and they like run, and the elastic stretches out, but then the weight, like they stop, and then the weight kind of slams into their back or something, right? And stopping even for pleasure can be like that. So you can actually investigate the mixture of pleasure and also agitation, and the kind of momentum of the busyness. And sometimes the pleasure is not enough to soothe the busyness. So that's one piece. Over time, as we practice, pain and discomfort tends to wake us up more and more deeply. Like when suffering is arising, suffering in a deep way has become a mindfulness valve for me. Like when I'm suffering physically or emotionally, like I'm quite sensitive to that, and that does ignite my curiosity, and I want to know what's happening. I want to see how am I clinging, what's going on. But pleasantness tends to make us unconscious, because it's like it doesn't trigger any alarm bells. It's like, oh, everything's cool. This ice cream, delicious, right? It's like there are no problems here. And so, we have less experience. I was talking about equanimity with resistance. We have less experience opening to pleasure. And for some people, it can be interesting. Other kind of neurotic stuff can come up, in opening to pleasure. And it can feel sort of intimidating in some way to actually open deeply to pleasure. It can feel disorienting. It can be even frightening to look into the eyes of another person that you care about or that you love, and to actually open to the pleasure of that. One last thing I'll say is that pleasure, even very intense bliss, is slightly irritating for the nervous system. And And so, when we think about meditative, we think about meditative attainments and bliss, and the Buddha talked about rapture filling the body from head to toe, like no part of the body left out, drenched in pleasure. Like, sounds good, right? I could go for some of that instead of this resistance to noise, right, or whatever. But what we actually discover is that that even pleasure slightly fatigues the heart. And this is why the Buddha pointed to the highest happiness as peace, which is the only thing that truly leaves the heart at rest. That's another side. Okay, so let's take a few minutes, say hello to neighbors and tea, and we'll come back in a few minutes and have a talk.